Hello, everyone. My name is Preston Dennett, and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Today's episode is called Three Bedroom Visitations by Gray Aliens. Grays are probably the most common type of ET that people see. Certainly, that's true in my own files. And one of the most common types of encounters is what I would call a bedroom visitation. People wake up, usually at night, to find grays inside their bedroom. This happens quite a bit, and that's why I wanted to do this video. I've got 3 cases I'd like to share with you today, and each of them I think have some unique and interesting insights into what it's like to have a bedroom visitation, what the ET agenda is, and how people react to it. So let's just get started. Case 1, Connie. Connie comes from Mount Rainier in Washington. At the time of this encounter, she lived in a 3-story apartment building in not the greatest part of the city. And Connie had no reason to think she was having encounters. She really had not thought about UFOs at all. Her only real clue that something unusual was going on in her life was she was having a series of repetitive dreams in which she was being chased and felt like something was trying to capture her. But she did not in any way relate this to UFOs or extraterrestrials until one night in August of 1998, when she was having one of these weird chasing dreams. And then she woke up into what is probably the single most unusual experience of her entire life. What woke her up was a loud buzzing noise filling her apartment. At the same time, there was a very, very bright light coming in from the window. It filled up her whole bedroom. And she thought at first that it was a police helicopter and that perhaps there was a drug bust or some sort of crime going on outside because, again, she did not live in the best part of the city. So she was quite concerned and wanted to get up and investigate it, but found she was paralyzed. And this is when she started to realize several things at once. The bright light was still there, but it wasn't really a helicopter sound. It was a loud buzzing noise. She was unable to move, and as she's trying to orient herself, she sees that there is a silver-suited, gray-type ET standing right next to her bed. And this really, of course, frightened her, and unable to move really anything except her eyes, she saw that there was in fact another one standing at the foot of her bed. And her first thought was, oh no, they're here. She has no idea why she thought that, who they were, but she was absolutely convinced that something or someone is in the room. And that's when she saw these things. And I'll just quote Connie in her own words, as she says, I was fully awake. My eyes were wide open. My body was paralyzed. I kind of looked around because I couldn't move. I turned my eyes to the left, closest to the window, and there was a small being dressed in a foil, silvery suit. It was a real skin-tight uniform, like a leotard, silvery in color, like aluminum foil. It had a scaly look about it, like snakeskin. It looked like it was also wearing some kinds of gloves and a belt. I tried to look up, but I couldn't see any further than the belt portion. So this shocked her, and most of her attention was riveted to this being, but at the same time she could see another one standing at the foot of her bed. And this filled her with fear. And she tried to break free of the paralysis. As she says, and I quote, I knew I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed with all my might, get out of here! My heart beat like it was going to blow out of my head. It was so loud it was beating in my ears. I felt as if my whole body was sweating all its water out of it. I could not move. With all my might, I wanted to kick and scream and fight. I'm not a religious person, although I know how to recite my Catholic prayers. As soon as I called for help from the Almighty, I woke up. Connie looked at the clock. It was 3:30 a.m. The strange light and the weird humming noise were now gone, and there was no ETs in her bedroom. And she thought for a second it might even be a dream. But then she noticed something very strange. Her legs were propped up in, as she says, kind of like a pap smear position. And she looked under the covers and got a real shock. She had no underwear on. So she quickly jumped out of bed and realized she was actually lying crosswise on the mattress instead of vertically as she had gone to bed. And secondly, and even more strange, her bed sheets and blanket were perfectly made and tucked in, and the bed did not even look like it had been slept in. As she says, it was the weirdest thing. It was so strange. I was tucked in. I had the comforter over me. My pillow wasn't moved. It looked like I had just opened my bed and it was nicely made. Nothing looked like it was disturbed, like I hadn't even slept there considering the amount of fighting and kicking I thought I was doing. At this point, she noticed a cool sensation running down her legs, and it was this fluid. And that, of course, concerned her. It made it very clear that this was no dream. So she had to get ready for work and took a shower, got ready for work, and went off to her office. And this is when more weird things started to happen. She noticed that her mouth was numb, and it had a weird chemical taste in it. Her stomach was upset, up in knots, and she was suffering from diarrhea and nausea. She collected herself as best as she could and started her work at the office, turned on her computer, and shortly after that, the computer mysteriously went down. She called over the IT person to help put her computer back online, and while he was doing that, she went to go make some copies on the copier machine, and no sooner had she turned it on when it completely malfunctioned. She thought that was strange, so she decided that she would try to get some of the faxes done that she had to fax. She went over to the fax machine, and that also malfunctioned. And this is when she realized that something very strange was going on. Every machine that she touched was breaking down. That's certainly something I have heard before. I think something about having a UFO encounter raises a person's vibration, raises their bioelectric field, and it causes all kinds of problems with electromagnetic machinery. Watches, televisions, radios, light bulbs, computers, all of these things can break down and do so a lot with contactees. And that was certainly happening with her. So she didn't feel well, and this persisted for a couple of weeks. And in fact, she said, as she described it, she got the shakes for about 2 weeks and finally recovered. But this was quite upsetting to her initially, and she thought, was this, a demon? Was this a ghost? What had happened to her? And this sort of kick-started her spiritual journey. She was already moving away from religion and was looking for more answers to the purpose of life. Why we are here? Are we alone in the universe? What's the meaning of life? This sort of thing. So she started looking into her experience, and she decided no, it was not demons that she saw. And in fact, doing the research on the internet, it sounded very much like she had had a UFO encounter. And that caused her to start re-evaluating everything. And she looked into her past to see if there was any clues that she had had encounters before. And she found many of them, quite a few. There were, of course, the chasing dreams, but beyond that, she'd often wake up in her bed lying the wrong direction, sideways in her bed, or even sometimes she'd wake up with her feet on her pillow at the head of the bed and her head at the foot of the bed. She complained to her parents about it, and they said, well, you just must be a restless sleeper. But she knew she couldn't be that restless. It just didn't make sense. She also had other little clues. She had a lot of sinus problems. Sometimes she would wake up and there would be these weird red marks in a triangle on her neck right below her lymph nodes. It was always the same place, same little red dots in a perfect triangle. If it was bug bites, she thought it wouldn't be so regular like that. Another thing was one time she, at some point in her life, felt like there was this weird thing stuck in her throat near her sinuses. She went to the doctor about it and the doctor couldn't find anything. But at some point she experienced a severe coughing fit and out came this peculiar looking little object. At the time she didn't think anything about implants, but now looking back she wonders because this object looked peculiar. As she says, it was really tiny, probably half a pea size. It was white, it was round, and it was organic looking. I tried to squish it, but I couldn't break it. I couldn't destroy it. I thought that was kind of strange. But it was scary looking, so I ended up throwing it out. There were other clues. There was several times as a child she would wake up and hear a very loud buzzing noise overhead. No one else in the house ever seemed to hear it, just her. As she grew up, she had a child, and her child suffered from a series of pretty severe nosebleeds. They could not figure that out. So there were all these little clues. Another thing that was very unusual is that her family would joke with her that she was an alien. As it turned out, Connie was very short, under 5 feet tall, and she also had a very, very high forehead that gave her a somewhat unusual appearance. And her family joked all the time, well, maybe you are half alien. At the time, she didn't think it was funny. And now after this experience, she really wondered about it. That could there be something to this? Was she even a hybrid? So there were all these weird little clues that perhaps something very unusual was going on with her. And it was just a few months after this encounter that she had her first real big UFO sighting. She was out on a date with a gentleman at a restaurant, and they were seated in an outdoor section and talking when both of them saw a cluster of lights in the sky. It wasn't terribly far away, but it wasn't super close either. But it was unusual enough that it caught both of their attention, and they were looking at it. And as Connie says, all of a sudden, the weirdest thing happened. It just took off. It made a really fast zigzag maneuver and just disappeared. We were looking up there. I looked at him, and we looked at each other. And Connie's date was surprised, and he said, well, I did not see that. And Connie looked at him amazed and said, well, yes, you did, because we both saw it. It was strange because although they were at a restaurant and there were many other people there, no one else seemed to see it. It was as if the sighting was just for them. So what I find interesting about this case is that Connie had many clues throughout her life that she was having contact, but never really picked up on it until she had one of these bedroom visitations. And that opened it up, and she realized that there were all these clues to the possibility that she was, in fact, a contactee, which she does think she is, considering, the implant, the strange marks on her neck, the sinus problems, her daughter having nosebleeds, the weird buzzing noises, and of course the bedroom visitation itself, and the way she affects electronics. Ultimately, the biggest effect was that Connie became spiritually transformed and really became a spiritual seeker and opened up to a lot of different subjects, such as UFOs and life after death and spirituality. Although her encounter was traumatic, she does not feel like the ETs were trying to hurt her or scare her or anything like that. She does have a lot of questions about her experiences, but she feels ultimately that it was a good experience and she wouldn't mind having another. So that's case one. Now we move to Case 2, Madison. Madison lived in New York with her family, and it was in 1984 that she had her first encounter. She was driving with her parents and her brother. She was 10 years old. They were driving from Peekskill to Ossining, New York. And that's when they saw a UFO hovering over the highway, a large boomerang-shaped object at treetop level. And a lot of people were seeing it. In fact, it stopped traffic on the highway. As she says, everybody was parked and looking at it. I got scared because everybody was looking at it. I thought it was the end of the world. I was pretty scared. She and her family didn't realize it at the time, but New York, upstate New York, was going through a massive wave of sightings, which we now know is the Hudson Valley UFO wave. There's been several books written about this incredible wave of sightings. It's one of the most widely viewed series of UFO events in U.S. history, and she was a part of it. And her encounters did not stop there. It was just 4 years later when she and her entire family had another really dramatic, very close-up encounter outside her home. This was on the evening of March 17th, 1988, when there was this enormous egg-shaped object hovering right at treetop level in the backyard. Madison's mom saw it first and called everyone outside. And as Madison says, I don't know what it was. It wasn't a Goodyear blimp. It was amazing. It was really close. There was a tree in the backyard, and you could hear it brushing against the tree. That's how low it was. And I could hear it. It was making a humming noise, and it was turning all colors, blue, green. It was weird. So that was it, just these two sightings. Madison had no reason to think that she was having actual contact. And she grew up, became an adult, went to school, became a dental assistant, found an apartment in White Plains, New York, a pretty densely populated area. And this is when she had her bedroom visitation. This was on the evening of May 15th, 1995. She had just had her son, who was 3 months old, and he was sleeping in the same room with her because he was so young. Madison was a single parent at this time. Although she had had a relationship, it didn't work out, so she was raising her son by herself in this apartment in White Plains, New York. And she usually stays up late. In fact, she had invited someone over that evening. But for some weird reason, she found herself going to bed at around 10 p.m., something she never does. So that was the first clue that something strange was happening. And then at some point, she woke up to find that there were several beings in her room. And she looked at them, and they were what we would now call grays. And she was absolutely stricken with terror. This was not a good experience for her in any way. As she says, this is kind of embarrassing for me to tell you, but I know it wasn't a dream. I woke up and there were about 6 or 8 beings, and they were going around my bed. I remember they were pushing me down, and I woke up. I don't know what they were doing, but I know they woke me up. She was not only scared, she was very angry because it seemed like they were interested in looking at her infant son, who was only 3 months old, and she was very protective of him. And as she's looking at these beings, she was repulsed by their appearance. It really frightened her badly. As she says, I remember cursing at them. Get the F off me. Leave me alone. Where's my baby? And they were surrounding me. It was dark. I remember looking up, and they were pressing against my chest and my forehead. It was a weird feeling. I don't know if they were physically touching me. It was like a weird force. I don't know. It was very, very weird. I can remember kicking my feet, and they just stood there. It was scary. They just stood there looking at me like I was some kind of animal or something, like we do with animals, like experimenting on them. So she fought and fought with them, and the next thing she knows, they were gone. She jumped up and checked on her son. He was fine. The only thing that was different was that there was this weird sort of crackling electricity in the air. The atmosphere itself felt somewhat charged and different. But her son appeared to be fine. She herself was fine. And she's trying to orient herself when there's a knock on the door. And it's her friend. It's now 11 p.m. He's showing up. And she opens the door and immediately tells him what happened. And he was kind of skeptical and said, well, maybe it was just a dream. And she insisted that no, it was not a dream. I was awake. And it was this event which caused her, like it does with other witnesses, certainly like it did with Connie, to examine her past. And this is when she found clues, like Connie, that she had been having experiences her whole life. So this is a pattern we see over and over. And there were, of course, the two close-up UFO sightings. And when a UFO is within a couple of 100 feet of a person, that is definitely a huge red flag. But there were other clues. As a young kid, she saw the television program The Muppets, which is supposed to be a fun program. But for some reason, the sight of these Muppets with their wide staring eyes completely terrified her and sparked a series of what she called her Muppet nightmares. She hated the Muppets. They scared her to death. So that was one clue. And she did have an experience at age 14, which she is now absolutely convinced was a visitation, because she woke up and there was someone or something in her room. And she was unable to move and unable to see who it was, but she was absolutely convinced that there was someone there. As she says, and I quote, "Somebody was there. I remember I felt like I was drugged, but I knew that there was somebody in front of me in my room." And she fell asleep, and she woke up a short time later being dropped into her bed from a couple of inches above. And that woke her up. As she says, "I remember my body dropping. When I woke up, my body was dropped to the bed." And again, she lost consciousness, woke up the next morning, and this is when she had a really strange discovery. As she says, "That morning when I woke up, I felt really weird. Not only that, there was dirt on my bed, on my couch in the living room, on the floor, and it was going towards the window. That was the weirdest experience I ever had." She now is pretty much convinced that this was a visitation. And I have to say, it fits the pattern I've heard from many other people. It was shortly after that she had another weird experience where she fainted for no reason or had what might have been a seizure. They ended up going to the doctor about it, but he couldn't find anything wrong with her. And that night, Madison and her mother both woke up to hear someone moving around in the living room, but for some reason they didn't or couldn't get up to investigate. As Madison says, maybe it could have been one of the beings. I hate thinking about it, but it could be. You never know. So now she's looking back on her past and sees all these little clues that perhaps she was having encounters her whole life, but didn't really realize it until she had this full-on waking experience, this bedroom visitation. And she did tell her family about it and a few close friends. Some were skeptical, and she decided that she's not going to tell anyone else because it was quite embarrassing telling people that she thought she had been visited by extraterrestrials. So she just kept it quiet and didn't really tell anybody. But one after effect of this was a pretty long-lasting anxiety. She says she has the constant feeling that she is being watched and observed, that there's someone looking at her. Can't tell you how many times contactees have told me this, that they have this feeling that they are being watched. And that is certainly true with Madison. As she says, I feel ridiculous, but sometimes I feel like they are watching me or something. I'm always dreaming of them. Sometimes they're just there, like they're in my room. I sometimes sleep with the light on because I'm thinking of that experience. So yeah, that's something also I've heard from many people who have encounters. They have trouble sleeping without a night light or a light on in the hallway or some type of background music, or being alone can frighten them. So yeah, she had all these lasting after effects. As she says, I just hope that they don't come around again. It was scary. I'll put it this way, I cannot be by myself in a house sometimes. And I live in a building. I can't be alone because I'm afraid. I can't leave the door open in my room at night. I have to close it and turn my light on, or at least leave the TV on. When I think about it, I get scared. She has thought about going under hypnotic regression. She did some research and realized that this is one way to recover memories. But she's afraid it might open up a can of worms, that it might be scary, and she's decided that she is not going to do it. And she just decided that she's not going to explore this at all and try to live a normal life as best as she can. So that has been how she reacted to this experience. And it was some years later, her son was around 11, 12 years old, and they were watching television when a UFO program came on featuring gray aliens. And her son jumped up and changed the channel. This had happened before, and she just ignored it. But when he kept doing it, when it happened again, she confronted him about it. And she asked him, what's wrong? And he said, I hate those things. And she said, why? And he said, I don't know why, I just hate them. I'm just scared of them. And she persisted, tell me why. And he turned away from her and said, I don't want to talk about it, Mom. It's scary. I don't like it. So I think this is significant because what we have seen is this thing does track families. If a person is having encounters, it's quite likely their parents or grandparents have, and also that their children have. And that seems to be true in Madison's case. And one final end note, which I think is really significant in this case, because this also turns up. Madison, following this encounter, began having a series of dreams about wide-scale disasters. As she says, my dreams are mostly about water and major floods. What could this mean? I don't know. She feels like it might be connected to all this, and they could be prophetic dreams about upcoming disasters. And I have to wonder about that because that turns up quite a bit. So that's Madison's case, and it has all these really interesting details. It shows that ETs do seem to be interested in reproduction, the fact that they visited her 3-month-old son, and often they do warn people about disasters. That does seem to be true in Madison's case. And it can cause a very strong fear reaction, which is absolutely true in Madison's case. She does not feel like this was a benevolent experience. She doesn't want it to happen again, and she has no interest in exploring it further. So this is how some people will react. But now let's move to the third case, and one of the most interesting. This is case 3. Evelyn. Evelyn has had no memories of any encounters. She lives in Ontario, Canada, And her first real encounter occurred one evening in August of 1998. She was alone in the house. She has two daughters at that time who lived with her. And just for fun, she thought she'd sleep in her daughter's bedroom. And she woke up in the middle of the night because she sensed that someone was in the room. As Evelyn says, and I quote, "You just get that feeling that someone's there. So I got up out of sleep and I noticed that I couldn't move. I couldn't even open my eyes. I was like paralyzed. Finally, after really fighting, I got one eye open and then the other. And when I did that, I saw 6 grays around my bed." She recognized them instantly as grays. She had seen them on TV enough to recognize them. And for whatever reason, she felt no fear whatsoever. She did not feel like they were there to hurt her or anything. In fact, she got a really friendly feeling from them. And the gray that was standing to her left spoke to her telepathically and said, "Don't be afraid. We're not here to harm you. We are on a mission." And Evelyn replied, "Okay," and felt no fear, and said she was felt with what she says is a, quote, calming feeling, which was very powerful. And she was amazed at what happened next. As she says, "When I said that, the paralysis started to go down. I was starting to feel my body, and I could move a little bit. And the other guys, the other 5 of them, were just standing there all around the bed. The one standing to my left side held a wand, maybe about a foot long and 2 inches in diameter. It was bright. The whole thing was shining. It was like full of energy. And he took the wand and he went from the top of my head down to the tips of my toes. Then the guy on my right side said, 'Extend your arm.' So I extended my arm. And she felt like they were scanning or measuring her body for something. And at this point, she realized she had full freedom of movement. And as Evelyn says, and I quote, "I sat up in bed, just sat there and looked at them. And I was shaking my head thinking, is this real? Somebody pinch me. I don't know why, but I wasn't afraid. I was in awe of them. They were 4 feet high. The head is bigger than the body. Their eyes were dark and big. They had a one-piece suit on, a very light gray color. They themselves were like a baby powder color. Their features were round. They had very small noses, very thin pencil mouths. I didn't notice any ears. I've always known about the Greys. I know that a lot of people have had abductions, and they weren't very pleasant. And there's a lot written out there that they're going to harm you. But I didn't feel like they were going to harm me. Mine seemed to be really nice. It was really nurturing, to tell you the truth." At this point, her memory ends. She doesn't know what happened next. The next thing she knows, it's morning. As she says, "When I woke up, I thought it was all a dream, but it was so vivid. And when I looked on the inside of my arm, the elbow part, there were 2 small horizontal marks. I know they weren't there when I went to bed that night." So now she's convinced that this was, in fact, a real experience. And it wasn't long before she had further evidence of this. She did tell her daughters when they came home, and both her daughters looked at her like she was crazy. They were supportive, but didn't really believe it. They were skeptical. And then one of them had an encounter along with Evelyn, and of course became a believer. As Evelyn says, and I quote, "My daughter and friend were sitting by a campfire one night, just sitting and talking and laughing and singing. It was pitch dark. The only light was from the fire pit. All of a sudden, this beautiful light surrounded us. My daughter freaked out. I told her to just sit still. I don't know who they were, They didn't stay long. Within a minute, the light went up and disappeared. When I looked up, I could see an orange, reddish ball fly away. So Evelyn feels like these are benevolent encounters. And in fact, she had another experience where she was visited and they healed her, she believes, of back pain. And not only that, she came away from the experience feeling like she also had the ability to heal and has done so successfully. She relieved other people's back pain. So she had this really interesting experience with healing, which does turn up in many, many cases. And that's certainly true with Evelyn. And she had another really interesting experience with healing. As she says, and I quote, "One of my cats got into a fight with a raccoon and came home with his one eye hanging out. I asked my alien friends to heal him. 2 days later, he came home healed." So that was weird. She didn't actually see her cat getting taken or anything like that. But for him to come home without any sign of injury was bordering on miraculous. And she feels pretty sure that her ET friends healed her cat. It's only one of several cases I have of animals that have been healed. So it definitely fits right in the pattern. And following all this, Evan became very deeply spiritual, had a lot of psychic events, and in fact started channeling, and was channeling all kinds of messages, often about widespread disasters striking our planet, about the importance of love, warnings against war and violence, this sort of thing. All about the importance of getting along with each other and the possible future destruction of our planet. And it wasn't long before she had a full-on experience where this was underlined, and they basically told her flat out that this is a very real danger. As she says, "Two came to me and told me they wanted to show me something. They took my hand, and before I knew what was happening, I was in outer space looking down on our planet. I was in awe. Then they started to bring me back. Flying towards the earth as I got closer, I could see the wars, people dying from starvation, us destroying this beautiful planet. They told me that this made them sad. They put us on this planet. I feel that they are the teachers." So Evelyn has come away from this experience believing that these guys are absolutely benevolent. And for her, the experience was not in the least bit frightening. It was, in fact, very healing. And she feels that they are trying to teach us. So that's what's interesting about these three cases. Each is slightly different. I presented each of these cases in my latest book, Wondrous, 25 True UFO Encounters. And I wanted to do this video because not only are gray encounters really common, but this type of encounter, the bedroom visitation, is very common. I hear it all the time. And each of these three cases reveals various insights into the grays, who they are, why they're here, and what it's like to have an encounter. For example, in Connie's case and in Madison's case, they lived with a lifetime of strange experiences and were probably having contact since early childhood, but didn't recognize it until they had one of these bedroom visitations. And Connie came away from her experience spiritually transformed. And this is absolutely true with Evelyn as well. Connie has had all kinds of problems with electromagnetic instruments. I hear that all the time. Madison has come away with PTSD and a real fear and anxiety. That's another thing I hear quite often. She chose not to explore these experiences and instead is just trying to shelve them in the back of her mind and live a normal life, which is, totally understandable. whereas the other two really faced it head on, and I think got the better benefits of having an encounter, which include, being spiritually transformed and possibly even healed and getting warnings. But that's true of Madison too. She's having all these dreams of floods, widespread floods across our planet. So there's a lot of commonalities to these experiences that I think help corroborate these experiences and add a level of credibility to them. Each of them talk about strange marks on their body, implants, these sort of things. So there's all these details that show that these experiences are probably real. And again, like Madison, or rather Connie and Evelyn both talk about how their children may be having encounters as well. So that's why I wanted to do this video, to let people know about this type of encounter, what it's like to see grays in your bedroom, why they're there, and the after effects of these experiences. So that's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. I want to thank you once again for watching. I really appreciate it. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep searching for answers, and most importantly, and I'm serious about this, keep having fun. It's important. That's why we're here. Till next time.